Tonight, Web of Harm, the new legislation aimed at tackling online dangers and safeguarding children. The long-awaited framework for protecting the vulnerable.
I would love those images to be gone.
And the balancing act between safety and freedoms.
This bill targets the worst of what we see online.
A global push to shore up support for Ukraine and the pressure on Canada over defense spending.
There is more to do.
Also, the start of a coroner's inquest into how a mass killer died in police custody. Plus, the soaring cost of extra fees. A travel check-in on the true price of flights.
And that can add up quite a bit.
And kicking off some real excitement for a Canadian soccer star.
Great news for the growth of the game.
The field day over the future of Alphonso Davies.
It's Alphonso Davies!
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight with a new plan aimed at targeting what is all too often an invisible battlefield of digital danger. Under the new online harms bill unveiled today, 5 years after it was first promised, platforms would have to remove non-consensual sexual content within 24 hours of a complaint being filed, or face a maximum fine of $10 million or 6% of global revenues. CTV's Michael Couture on the new measures to take on the trigger of torment impacting lives.
Her smile, her laughter, and her innocence have all been taken from her.
Jane doesn't want to share her full name, but she does want to share her story. Over a 2-year span, her toddler daughter was sexually abused by a trusted adult. Countless images and videos were posted online.
She asked me one time, she goes, "But Mom, you can take them down forever, right?" And I couldn't respond as a parent. I didn't know what to say.
But with this legislation, Jane hopes her daughter's childhood innocence can be restored and those images finally taken off the internet. The Online Harms Act proposes sweeping measures for online platforms to prevent and remove 7 types of content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor, is used to bully a child, induces a child to harm themselves, incites violent extremism or terrorism, incites violence, foments hatred, and intimate content communicated without consent. Now, before reading the bill, the opposition Conservatives had warned it would attack freedom of speech, but the minister says that's not what this is about.
We are not talking about stuff that some people call awful but lawful. There will still be humiliating comments.
Now, the legislation will not apply to private messages on platforms like Snapchat, Discord, or WhatsApp, places where non-consensual sexual images are often shared. The NDP supports the bill, but will push for amendments.
This bill is too important to be playing around with. We need to make sure that we are getting to the heart of the issue.
Jane agrees, and she says this bill gives her and her daughter hope.
I would love those images to be gone. Yeah, I mean, that is the ultimate. If that could be possible, that would be the best.
This new legislation does come with some hefty fines for online platforms that don't comply. Penalties can top $10 million or 6% of the platform's global revenues, whichever is greater. Omar?
All right, Mike, thank you for this tonight. Ukraine was forced to retreat from another village today as Russia continues to make gains along the front lines, and Western leaders gathered in Paris to find ways to hold off on any Russian surge. CTV's Heather Wright is on the ground in Lviv tonight.
This is the aftermath of a barrage of missiles and drones launched over Ukraine early this morning. A home in the Sumy region destroyed, the husband and wife who lived here killed.
Ми маємо боротися за людей у Криму.
In Kyiv, Ukraine's president marked 10 years since the occupation in Crimea began. On this day in 2014, demonstrators gathered in the Crimean capital, pushing back against Russia's incursion, the covert invasion that helped launch its full-scale assault 2 years ago. Today, the Kremlin brushed off the fresh sanctions placed on it last week by several countries, including Canada, vowing its economy will adapt. Those sanctions were in part due to the death of Alexei Navalny, who was found dead in a Russian penal colony 10 days ago. One of his closest allies claims Navalny was on the verge of being released in a prisoner swap. Maria Pevchik says Navalny was to be exchanged for an FSB agent serving a life sentence in Berlin for murder. Amid the outcry over Navalny's death, Ukraine's top spy chief says intelligence shows he died from a blood clot, a claim still unverified. In Paris today, nearly 24 leaders, including Canadian Minister of Defense Bill Blair, met to discuss efforts to speed up munitions production and show solidarity with Ukraine. Russia cannot win, French President Emmanuel Macron said, noting the general consensus around the table is that they must prepare for a Russian attack on their own countries in a few years' time. And while no new aid was announced at this conference, leaders are trying to show Moscow they have no intention of abandoning Ukraine as this war drags on.
Western leaders acknowledge there is a very real chance Russia gains the upper hand this year. This meeting meant to be a show of strength. But Ukraine needs support in the form of supplies, and how quickly those might be able to get to the front is still unclear. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. And Russia continues to silence any critics of the war in Ukraine, demanding a Nobel-winning human rights advocate serve 3 years in prison. 7-year-old Oleg Orlov is accused of, quote, repeatedly discrediting the Russian army by criticizing the conflict. Last year, a court found Orlov guilty and ordered him to pay a fine, but prosecutors appealed. They're now seeking imprisonment in a retrial. Cautious optimism as ceasefire talks continued in Qatar today. U.S. officials say negotiators are closing in on the terms of a temporary truce between Israel and Hamas that could see more hostages exchanged for detainees and aid for Gaza. Also, the Palestinian Prime Minister announced his resignation today. The move comes as the U.S. pressures the Palestinian Authority to make reforms over allegations of corruption. A U.S. airman who set himself on fire outside the Israeli embassy in Washington has died in hospital. Video posted online shows 25-year-old Aaron Bushnell walking towards the embassy yesterday to protest the war in Gaza. What happens next is too graphic to show. Bushnell declares, "I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest," before setting himself on fire. Washington police are investigating. An inquest into the capture and death of the man responsible for the worst mass stabbing in Canadian history began today in Saskatchewan, with dashcam footage of the exact moment Miles Sanderson was driven off the highway and arrested. Here's CTV's Allison Bamford.
I got to be tough for my people.
James Smith Cree Nation Chief Wally Burns wishes Miles Sanderson was still alive to face the consequences of his actions after brutally killing 11 people, most from his home community.
Clever way of not facing our people, a cowardly way.
Burns watched RCMP dashcam footage showing the exact moment police rammed Sanderson off the road in a stolen vehicle. Behind the chief, members of his community, including Sanderson's family, sat crying.
I know that once this week is over, there'll be a little bit more closure and we can continue the healing process.
The inquest heard Sanderson camped out in a rural area less than 80 kilometers from his last crime scene in the days following the mass stabbings. He eventually stole a truck from a nearby farm, triggering a high-speed police chase into oncoming traffic on a major highway north of Saskatoon.
It was nice to know the timeline and just appreciate the work that was done by the RCMP.
Video shows cops surrounding the rammed vehicle at gunpoint before dragging Sanderson out of the truck. Minutes later, he went into medical distress. Despite multiple attempts at life-saving measures, Sanderson was declared dead an hour after his arrest, leaving some community members calling for a national inquiry.
The whole justice system has failed. I really want to take this to the next level and say it to Canada, well, let's fix this problem.
Similar to the first inquest into the deaths of the 11 victims, a 6-person jury will determine how Sanderson died and make any recommendations that could prevent this from happening in the future. 13 witnesses, including RCMP officers, paramedics, and a forensic pathologist, are expected to testify throughout the week. Omar?
All right, Elson, thank you. Air Transat and its cabin crew have averted a possible strike and reached a new labor deal that comes with a pay hike. The agreement comes after 63% of flight attendants voted to accept the recommendations of federal mediators. The contract includes compound salary increases of 30% over 5 years. The deal affects 2,100 Air Transat flight attendants based in Montreal and Toronto. Well, Lynx Airline took its final flight today, now grounded for good. The low-cost airline closed passenger doors after a final flight from Calgary to Toronto at 12:01 this morning. The Calgary-based airline blames financial pressures related to inflation. Lynx passengers have been told to contact their credit card companies for refunds. The closure means less choice, and typically that amounts to higher prices, which is what's happening, but not for the reasons you might expect. Here's CTV's Heather Butts.
For those looking to fly their way to a new destination, airfares dropped about 14% last year, according to Stats Canada. But that doesn't necessarily mean a flight will cost you less overall.
They offer you a low fare as a way of drawing you into travel.
Once on the booking page, the costs can add up. Fees for a checked bag, seat selection, or refundable ticket. WestJet has increased its baggage fee system-wide for the first time since 2018. Purchased in advance with a basic fare, the first checked bag is now $35 to $42, up from $30 to $36. With Air Canada, it's roughly $36. Flair charges for carry-on, and a checked bag could cost up to $79, along with additional costs for booking over the phone and a credit card fee.
You're looking at all these different fees. You might not be accounting for one thing or another. You think you're getting a deal, and once you run those numbers, you're like, you know what? This price isn't as good as I had originally thought about.
Experts say it's a simple way for corporations to make money, to buy new equipment, pay employees, and shareholders.
The ancillary fees is a nice way of growing that revenue, and you don't have to spend a lot to make it. So it's an area of considerable interest, has been for years in the airline industry, and it's getting more of interest if you're competing particularly on price.
Major airlines say this format allows them to offer a range of fares, giving passengers flexibility. Not ideal, say consumer advocates.
They make the consumer go through a long, convoluted process to get to what their real price is. This makes it difficult to compare.
As fees increase, it's best to be a savvy traveler. Understand what you don't really have to pay for. Experts say use carry-on bags. Don't pay for seat selection. Just sit where the airline assigns you. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. A handful of tents are still standing at 3 of 5 homeless encampments in the Halifax area after today's deadline for occupants to leave expired.
I liked it where I was. Now I gotta relocate all my stuff.
Eviction notices were issued earlier this year after city officials deemed the encampments a health and safety risk. The city also says that while it does have the legal authority to remove people, it will plan to take a, quote, measured approach for those who refuse to leave. There's also been a surge of people experiencing homelessness on the other side of the country. Improving access to housing is a critical concern in British Columbia, but today, even the province's premier admitted that his government's new flipping tax on homes is no silver bullet. Here's Bureau Chief Andrew Johnson.
In front of the beautiful Metro Vancouver backdrop many people can't afford to call home, the Premier outlines a new plan to free up more housing.
The flipping tax is not a silver bullet. If it was a silver bullet, it would have been fired a long time ago.
David Eby's NDP government is introducing new legislation to punish people looking to profit from flipping homes.
If you own a home right now that you're planning on flipping, this is your final warning. This tax is coming in.
Here's how it works. If you buy a home and sell it within a year, you'll be taxed 20% on the profit. Hold on to it for a year and a half, then unload, you'll be dinged 10%. 2 years post-purchase, you're in the clear. What is not clear is whether the plan will actually make homes any more affordable in the province facing Canada's highest cost of living and with the entire country struggling to build its way out of a housing shortage.
At the end of the day, we need to stimulate and incentivize people to build more and to put homes on the market so that they're available.
I wish that we had the flipping tax 10, 15 years ago. It alone is just one part of a broader strategy to try and restore affordability forever.
Fewer than 10% of real estate transactions in Metro Vancouver take place within 2 years of a purchase, and many would be exempt in the case of divorce or a work transfer. For the opposition, it's a drop in the bucket.
It looks like there might be about 400 units a year that would have this tax imposed on it, which is negligible.
With just under 8 months to go until an election in BC and the cost of living identified as the #1 issue for voters, the EB government is going hard on housing. The next big move takes effect in May, a crackdown on Airbnb-style short-term rentals. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver. Coming up, the offense over defense spending.
There is more to do. The world is changing.
The Prime Minister's pledge after visiting Ukraine. And is Canadian superstar Alphonso Davies about to kick it with a new team? Shoring up support for war-torn Ukraine was top of the agenda for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today as he met with both the President and Prime Minister of Poland. As the war drags into its third year, the leaders expressed concern over the potentially deadly impact of delays in military shipments. CTV's Judy Trin reports from Warsaw.
An unintentional response at the end of a news conference.
Because we know that Russia must win this war. That Ukraine must win this war against Russia. Thank you.
Okay. But Justin Trudeau's verbal slip underlies real concerns that Russia has the upper hand in its war against Ukraine. Poland's prime minister urged Western allies to ramp up their military production.
We had a record high, I think, in Europe, maybe in the world, dedicated to defense. So we will continue those efforts for obvious reasons, because we would like to keep helping Ukraine and build our own security.
The Prime Minister says Canada is doing its part for Ukraine.
We have delivered over $10 billion in aid, including significant military aid, drones, light armored vehicles, guns and munitions.
Canada has also helped train nearly 40,000 Ukrainians in battlefield tactics and loaned Ukraine billions of dollars to keep its economy afloat. But some weapons aren't being delivered. An air defense system that the federal government purchased from the U.S. is being delayed by the American procurement process. Canada doesn't have the ability to increase production of artillery shells, so it's buying them from the Czech Republic to donate. But when it comes to collective protection, Canada hasn't even reached its NATO target yet of 2% GDP spending on defense.
There is more to do. The world is changing. It's getting more dangerous. I recognize Poland stepping up significantly in its own military spending, but so will Canada.
When asked about Canada's lack of commitment, Prime Minister Tu said he didn't want to be inhospitable, but Poland does want to lead by example. Poland is already spending nearly 4% of its GDP on defense and is considering doubling that amount. Judy Trin, CTV News, Warsaw.
Still ahead, the cop car and the chaos caught on tape. In Belgium today, protesting farmers clashed with police. Similar demonstrations broke out in Warsaw and Madrid as EU agriculture ministers met to discuss the intensifying dispute over red tape and competition from cheaper imports. In Brussels, farmers dumped liquid manure and hurled eggs at police who responded by firing water cannons. An intensifying investigation is underway after a Toronto police vehicle crashed into a pole on a busy downtown street. Video posted online shows the driver losing control as he attempts to make a turn. The vehicle mounts the sidewalk and slams into a light pole, narrowly missing pedestrians as it topples to the ground. Police say an officer in the passenger seat was taken to hospital for minor injuries. And a disappointing end to the U.S. mission to the moon. It will be cut short tomorrow. Odysseus will continue to collect data until Tuesday morning, but the lander has been sitting on its side since tumbling over during landing. It was the first U.S. spacecraft to land on the moon in more than 50 years. A moment of triumph as one of the most famous supermodels in the world showed off her picture-perfect aim at an NHL game. That's Cindy Crawford making an incredible shot from center ice during the intermission of the Chicago Blackhawks-Detroit Red Wings game. Despite calling herself a novice, Crawford looked like a pro. After the break, kicking goals.
This is bigger than Alphonso himself. So many kids are now believing that they too could play at the biggest clubs in the world.
A Canadian soccer sensation eyes his next big move. Canada's biggest soccer superstar has caught the eye of a giant Spanish club team. Alphonso Davies has reached a verbal agreement to join Real Madrid in either 2024 or 2025 when his contract expires with Bayern Munich. Here's CTV's Adrian Gabriel on how the potentially big score could boost his global star power.
Here at home, he's Canadian soccer royalty.
Davies' shot, sensational.
Internationally, Alphonso Davies is a household name for footy fanatics and even for those with a passive interest.
As a sports fan in this country, it doesn't get any more exciting than this.
Davies to Real Madrid has yet to be finalized, though multiple reports confirm that a verbal agreement is now in place. All that's needed is for his transfer fee to be agreed upon. If it gets completed, Davies would cement his name alongside other Real Madrid legends.
Ronaldo, the other Ronaldo, Zidane.
This is bigger than Alphonso himself. So many kids are now believing that they too could play at the biggest clubs in the world.
Davies' path to global soccer superstardom is in many ways an inspiring Canadian success story that began on the other side of the world.
This kid came from a refugee camp in Ghana, basically with nothing, makes the move over to Edmonton with nothing, and through his family support, he builds this wonderful footballing career where he's become one of the biggest names in world football.
And now he's poised to cash in a big way. According to Forbes, Real Madrid is soccer's most valuable franchise with a value of $6.07 billion.
When it comes to individual sports brands, you believe Davies could be the biggest this country has ever produced on the global stage.
With respect to other Canadian sports figures, his name dwarfs Connor McDavid, the biggest club in the global game with a Canadian boy playing for it. I mean, we have never seen that before.
At only 23 years of age, Davies has yet to hit his prime. While his final destination has yet to be solidified, there's one certainty. He's just beginning to scratch the surface of his otherworldly talent. Adrian Gabriel, CTV News, Toronto.
Soaring to even greater heights. That's a snapshot of this Monday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.